Mike, we just came off such a high going over the NFC North, our hometown, the Detroit Lions, and then I hate to start off such a low point, but I don't have a pun or a play on for this team. We back team recap Jacksonville Jaguars. I was thinking Saxonville, but they don't got no sacks, especially after Yannick gone. I was thinking the Sad Wars, and that just was sad in general. So I really got nothing, and I ain't gonna try to stretch this one.
No, I mean, I think we're good. From one team that's never been to a Super Bowl in the Lions to another in the Jaguars. I say we just hop right in. What are your kind of general thoughts on the Jaguars draft?
Yeah, and I think I think when you look at this team, you have to look at more than just the draft as an offseason in entirety. Uh, Signing Nick Foles to a big contract and then trading him away to the Bears, that's a chalk on the loss. Obviously Yannick Ngakoue, all the rumors been spiking around with him. He's probably not going to be playing for the team this year. That's a loss. Leonard Fournette, all that speculation, everything that went around there, chalk that off as a loss. So I feel like even if this draft class, and I don't mind this draft class, I think they got some quality players, some interesting players, a lot of athletes. I think that's where I'd go with this class. Is they went for athletes, very raw, athletic individuals. So C.J. Henderson, I think he was a good player. I just think they drafted him a little bit too early. I think he's a good athlete, but kind of the Lions kind of screwed him there, kind of shot him in the foot as we just went off the Lions. But I think them taking Jeff Okudah with the number 3 pick kind of forced their hand to pick C.J. Henderson there at 9. And I think he was by far the second best corner in this class. And I think the drop off from 2 to 3 was pretty substantial. So I guess I can't hate the pick. And then I think Jason, I think a great athlete at that DN position. You'd love to put him behind a veteran like Yannick and kind of have him mold into maybe that athletic, twitchy DN you're looking for. But he's likely going to have to replace Yannick, which I don't think is what they're. He's that kind of player that can step in and make that instant impact for the team. And then I think actually my favorite pick for their draft this year would be Chenault. I think that's an interesting little piece for them. I think he's kind of that Swiss Army knife, can do a little bit of everything. He's an athlete to say the least, and I think that's probably my favorite pick, and I think makes a lot of sense for them and that wide receiving core they're building off of.
No, I agree with most of that. I just think for me, each of those 3 players, they're just slightly overdrafted a little bit. And like you said, I think that the Lions did kind of force their hand a little bit, being that they essentially got the number 1 corner off the board after Okudah. They really got the number 1 pass rusher off the board after Chase Young as well. And they're kind of having to reach for these guys a little bit because you never know when someone's going to come up to take that number 2 guy. With Chenault, I think Chenault is interesting. Like you said, kind of that Swiss Army knife, can kind of do it all. He's kind of in that Deebo Samuel mold that everybody's looking for. Or even the NFL Combine had a whole segment about, finding the next Deebo. And I think Chenault, he might very well be. He's kind of the guy who you can get him on, on motions across the backfield, on screens. You can just hand him the ball if you want to. You can kind of do whatever you want with him. So I don't know, as a straight receiver, if his value is equivalent to kind of the guys picked around him, like the Chase Claypools, Michael Pittmans, T. Higgins, those kind of guys. But I do think that that's a really solid pick overall. And I think, as we'll kind of see in a couple minutes, this team did have a lot of holes. So really, no matter where you went, as long as you get a quality player, you couldn't go wrong. So from there, were there any kind of quality players that you thought they picked after kind of rounds 1 and 2, or no?
Yeah, I think a good little developmental piece is Josiah Scott. I think the corner from Michigan State. I think obviously that defense had a rough going. Probably spent way too much time on the field, more than they should have. So I think that's a pick that might be able to develop for them. They have a need at corner. It's very apparent with DJ Hayden and
Rashaan Melvin.
And Rashaan Melvin being 2 of their starting 3 corners, and that's a problem to say the least. So I think he might be able to develop into a nice little slot corner for them, maybe going forward in the future. Put him in some dime positions in this year, and maybe he can develop a little bit there. But other than that, I don't see too many on the back end. How about you?
No, I agree. I think that obviously losing Boye and Ramsey, you really can't go wrong taking a guy like Scott there in the 4th round. There's no real harm in taking flyers on bodies when really right now I don't even know if you have bodies when you're talking about Melvin and Hayden. One guy that I kind of did want to mention that they passed on that kind of surprised me was actually Jake Fromm, kind of in that 4th, really 5th round. I believe Fromm went like 2 picks after they selected Colin Johnson. And I thought if they were going to take a late round quarterback, as they obviously did with like Jake Luton, I thought that Jake Fromm would have been a really interesting guy to kind of give some competition to Gardner Minshew. But obviously, there must have been something that they didn't like with him. I'm not 100% sure what. I thought, considering a lot of people thought that he was maybe an early 4th-round prospect, I kind of like that in terms of just straight value. But apparently maybe Gardner's their guy, Mike. So with that being said, if Gardner is the guy, Mike, what do you think about this offense?
Yeah, to be honest, looking at it, just putting the 11 men out there, I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people are thinking. I actually don't think this is the worst offense in the NFL. It actually has some prospects and potential. It's young to say the least. I think that wide receiving core is interesting, and I'm interested to see how that develops with Chark, Westbrook, and Chenault. They all have similar characteristics, but they all have definitely some differences and can add a little bit more to that team and that core. And then from there, I think obviously it's going to be the Minshew show. I think it'll be fun to watch. Hopefully he can make something happen, but I'm not too sure I'm banking on that.
No, I agree. I think that with that wide receiver core, one of the problems with it going forward is that Westbrook, Cole, and Conley are all free agents after this year. So we really don't know if they're going to stay intact. But at least in the short term, that's a really explosive core. You have really 5 guys who can kind of take anything to the house. And when you have a quarterback like Gardner Minshew, who's not really going to force the ball down the field and create big plays on his own, I think that there is a lot of value in having guys like Chark, Westbrook, Chenault, Conley, and even Chris Thompson to an extent who can take balls underneath and create big plays, big momentum swings like that. I think another really interesting thing is that offensive line. They're returning all 5 of their starters. There's really no crazy standout guys. I know Norwell's kind of paid like one, but I do think across the board they're pretty solid. And for the most part, they're pretty young. So giving them another year of experience will definitely help out. I just think for me, it comes down to really is Minshew the guy? And personally, I really don't think that he is, honestly. I think that maybe a signing like a 1 year, had they signed like a Jameis, for example, I think that would have been a really interesting selection. I know a lot of people talk about them and Cam. I don't know if I love it because I think Cam should go to a team that's ready to compete for 1 year. This team isn't really ready to compete. They're not just a quarterback away. They do need to fill some holes on defense. But I do think that upgrading at that quarterback spot would definitely help them. So my kind of question to you, though, about Minshew is if this team kind of falls in line with everybody's expectations that they're going to be at the top of the draft next year, do you think that this is like a tank for Trevor situation going on here?
Absolutely. I think they have the talent on that offense that I think a young quarterback can come in and produce. And I think Lawrence obviously probably likely being the guy. I think they have the protection. He's not going to get killed come day one, and he has some weapons. I think they have some versatility. And obviously the Leonard Fournette situations, let's see how that plays out. Obviously he was on the trade market quite a bit this year and a lot of talk about that. So, but again, running back, it's been proven it's a really easy position to get day 2 and get a quality starter, if not even sometimes like a Pro Bowl like individual in day 2. So I don't think that's a huge problem, but yeah, I think it would likely be a tank for Trevor situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's really interesting when they really did have – you have to assume that they had every chance to trade up and go for a Tua or go for a Herbert, or even at that 20th spot where they selected Chice, and they could have technically went Jordan Love. So I found it really interesting that they're saying, for the short term at least, Minshew is the guy. And I kind of think that a lot of people are talking themselves into Minshew when in reality he is a backup quarterback at the end of the day. So I do agree that it is going to be a tank for Trevor situation. But what I like about it is kind of like you said, this is a team that there are a lot of pieces already in place. I think that there's a lot of value in bringing a rookie quarterback into an already established kind of situation. Whereas you see guys like, I mean, you could think back to Sam Bradford, like 10 years ago, or even Baker Mayfield a little bit in his first year, where you bring guys in with shoddy offensive lines or a lack of weapons, and you kind of see them under pressure. You see them almost getting killed. We talked about it a lot this year already. We talked about the Rosen scenario. We talked about the Haskins situation. And I think that if you do bring a guy like Trevor in maybe re-sign a couple of those wide receivers. I think that you're looking good for the long term. I really do. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it kind of shows this year with Minshew, the whole Minshew mania. How much of that was just these players making plays more than maybe Minshew was himself? Like, I maybe not enough credit went to the actual other 10 people on offense that were making these plays, making these catches, taking balls to the house. I think more, and I think that shows how much actually was the offense and how much was Minshew. I think it's probably more of the former on that.
No, I definitely agree. I think that what we saw last year, the rest of the team kind of elevated Minshew to a point to where we had the Minshew magic, Minshew mania, whatever you want to call it. But I really do think that kind of the missing ingredient here is the quarterback who can really elevate the rest of them. And I do think that a guy like Trevor would probably get that done and kind of bring this team back to where they were a couple of years ago. But I mean, speaking of a couple of years ago, Mike, obviously this team was known as Jacksonville for a reason. They had one of the top defenses in the league, really one of the top defenses of the past decade, if we're going to be completely honest. But it's kind of a shell of its former self now. So what are your general kind of thoughts of maybe some optimism on this defense now, if you have any?
Yeah, I think they have young athletes, and I think that shows. I think I'd like to say Yannick, but I think that one's gone. But Josh Allen, Miles Jack, Chasan, C.J. Henderson, Ronnie Harrison. I think that those are all really good pieces, and they're all really good development. I think they're all still very early in their development. So hopefully we can see some progress from that. But they definitely are not Saxonville, to say the least. And I think when I was talking about their bad offseason, I think I missed a pretty big name, Clyde Campbell. I think losing that caliber of player, I think that's huge, and that speaks a lot because that man was just a space eater, not just a space eater, creating space for players like Miles Jack or Telvin Smith when he was here, but I think he also produced on double teams. He broke the double teams. He actually got to the quarterback with all those other things while also taking bodies. So I think that's going to be a huge loss, and no one on this team, not Taven Bryan, obviously stepping in a bigger role, he's not going to replace that kind of production.
No, I mean, I agree, man. It's just kind of sad looking at this defense, honestly. We talked about it during our mock draft, but in the past, what was it, 18 months, this team on their defensive line alone has lost Calais Campbell. They've lost Marcel Darius. They've lost Malik Jackson. That's 3 Pro Bowl to all-pro level guys that you've just completely lost. And then you even think about the secondary. The secondary is just a shame because, I mean, I remember a couple of years ago when they had Jalen Ramsey, they had A.J. Boye, they had Tashawn Gibson. Really, like, the worst player in their secondary was Barry Church. And it's like today, I know Barry's out of the league now, but, like, he might be the best player in that secondary if he was still around. I think that it's just a shame, man. I mean, and then obviously in the linebacking core, losing Telvin Smith, like a Paul Posluszny retired. I just think that this team is such a shell of its former self. And like you said, they have some athletes. So athletes, they can only take you so far. And I think we're going to see that this upcoming season because it probably will be a little bit ugly with all these raw guys like the Chaisons. I even think Josh Allen's kind of raw, honestly. I think that he was helped out a lot by Calais and whatnot. And then that secondary, obviously. So I really do think that maybe just next year for these freak athletes, another year to kind of cultivate their technique, improve their football IQ, get them some more reps. I think that's going to be super important and kind of put them on the same timeline as that offense that we talked about as they probably look to get a quarterback of the future. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I guess there's a lot of teams, obviously, like usually a lot of teams picking up at the top end of the draft, they always have raw talent. The Jags, the Redskins, the Lions in a lesser form, the Browns, like all those teams always have raw talent, but it's the veterans. It's like you have to have that mix. There has to be some kind of give and take, and this team doesn't have any give and take. They traded away their veterans. They traded away those players that could help some of these athletes, these young players, kind of take that next step. And I think that's where it hurts. And obviously the one that sticks out on the depth chart is Yannick, but he's likely gone. You don't have anyone to bring this next tier kind of to the next step. And I think that's the biggest problem with this team.
No, I agree. I think that, and a big problem right now is you only do have $20 million available in cap space because they're sitting with $37 million dead money from all those guys that they lost. So I do think that there are definitely some free agents available. I mean, you look at like a Logan Ryan, for example. You can't tell me that he wouldn't help out opposite of C.J. Henderson. I know before he came on, you were mentioning like a Damon Harrison. I think that'd be a perfect kind of plug and play guy to get an upgrade over Avery Jones, for example. And then you're starting to find that mix a little bit. Maybe there's a free safety out there you could go sign. I just think that there's a lot of holes on this team where you don't have long-term solutions, and I do think that you could kind of break into that cap space to really drastically improve your team for not only the short term when those veterans are on the team, but really, like you said, for the long term, based on what these young guys are learning from them. So, I mean, other than that, do you want to hop into the schedule?
Let's get right in it.
Let's get right in it. So, Mike, I was checking out the Vegas odds before we came on, and they have the Jaguars pinned between like 4.5 and 5 wins. So I'm not going to make you go game by game, but what do you think are kind of some interesting games that maybe they could win, as well as do you think that you would take the over or under on 4.5?
Yeah, so per talent base, I think they're better than that. Obviously, we already talked about those wide receivers. All 5 of them likely can really take a ball to the house. They can make those big plays to kind of switch the pace of a game and be able to kind of sneak some of these games from some of these teams that you might chalk the Jags up for a loss. So I think talent-wise, they are better than the 4.5 to 5.5. I think they're closer to maybe a 6, maybe even a 7. But I got to imagine that tank for Trevor's in the mind of the front office and even some of these players, maybe some of these weapons and maybe this offensive line. And I think they might end up a little bit at that 4 mark. I think that's I think they're a little bit better than their talent is a little bit better than their record is going to show. And I think that's what we're going to see from this team.
I agree with that. We were kind of talking about that with the Giants, for example, where we were saying that we think that the record will be kind of the same, but the quality of play will increase. I think that with the Jaguars, you might only see 4, maybe 5 wins. I'm kind of in that range, right? Obviously, right around the 4.5. But I do think that the quality of play will be pretty solid. Like, it won't be terrible. I do think that this is a team who, especially in the second half of their schedule when things are pretty tough, they could maybe play spoiler to a Minnesota Vikings or Tennessee Titans, or even the Indianapolis Colts in Week 17. I really do think that this is a team that has the talent, and especially the raw talent, as we kind of said. I just don't know if they're along where they need to be to kind of get the job done. So do you have any games in particular that you think, if you had to take the Jaguars, that you would take them just on the offset, looking as potential wins?
Yeah, it might be too late in the season for it to matter for them, and they might be at the point just tanking for Trevor. But I think the Bears is a very winnable game, and probably not a surprise if you guys seen the Bears video, but I think that's a winnable game. I think they probably have a little bit more on the – I think they do have on the offensive side, whether that be with the weapons, the offensive line, and I'm not going to go into the quarterback situation, but I think Minshew versus Trubisky might actually be a conversation to be had. Obviously, the defense isn't there, but if they could swing just a couple big plays, I think that might be a game to watch. And also I think they could swing an interdivision team. I think maybe the Colts, one of those 2 matchups. I think they might be able to punch Week 1 the Colts in the mouth, and they might not be ready for it. So I think that might be a winnable game, to say the least.
I agree, especially with that Colts Week 1 game. Phillip Rivers, when has he ever played outside of the Chargers? So it'll be really interesting to see how. Obviously, we think that his situation in Indianapolis is a good one, which we'll touch on in a future video. But I do think that there is a chance where you could kind of come out and punch them in the mouth a little bit. I think Week 2 is also another interesting one as well. Talk about interdivision. You have a lot of Titans that kind of exceeded expectations last year. And I don't know how many people think Tannehill should be their long-term solution at quarterback. And maybe they're kind of resting on their laurels a little bit, and you can kind of catch them on their heels. So I really wouldn't be shocked, honestly, at the end of the day, if this Jaguars team starts off kind of 4-4, just looking at the first half of their schedule. I think that that's super realistic. The problem for me, like I said, is that back half is when it kind of gets tough. And I honestly wouldn't be shocked if we're looking at like an 0-8 or 1-7, maybe a 2-6. I'm a little bit higher on the Bears than you are, obviously. But I do think that there's definitely some promise. So what I'll say is, if you guys think that there's some promise with Mic'd Up, leave a like, comment, subscribe. You know the deal. If you guys have a team that you want us to do next, just toss them in the comments, and we will push them to the front of the line. I mean, Mike, if somebody says Hey, can you do the Baltimore Ravens? Who are we doing, Mike?
Oh, we're doing the Ravens.
We are doing the Ravens. But obviously, to this point, we're just going division by division otherwise. So if you have no problem, if you're a Colts, Titans, Texans fan, just stay here, par for the course. So on that, Mike, do you have anything else, or are we out of here?
I think we mic'd in, and I think we got to mic out.